The doors to Overlord Sektar's throne room exploded inward in a shower of metal and stone as Colonel Kate Ross led her Marines into the heart of Kethvar power. The human soldiers moved with mechanical precision that spoke of countless hours of training for exactly this type of operation. Their weapons tracked every alien in the room while their formation provided overlapping fields of fire that would eliminate any threat in seconds. Jake Martinez had never been happier to see armed humans in his life. The past few days had tested his diplomatic training and his military background, but now both phases of the mission were complete. The intelligence had been gathered, and the rescue was underway. Everything else was just cleanup work. Ambassador Martinez, Colonel Ross said without taking her eyes off the Kethvar guards. Are you and your team ready for immediate extraction? Affirmative, Colonel, Jake replied. Dr. Chen has critical intelligence that needs to reach Fleet Command immediately. The Marines moved like a machine designed for close-quarters combat. Half the squad maintained defensive positions, while the other half secured the human prisoners and prepared them for movement. The Kethvar guards made no attempt to resist because they could see death in the eyes of soldiers who had spent the last few hours liberating torture facilities. Overlord Sektar stood beside his throne, watching his empire collapse in real time. Reports flooded in from across Kethvar space describing human attacks that were destroying centuries of military buildup with surgical precision. His fleet commanders were requesting permission to surrender before their ships joined the growing debris fields around his homeworld. This is impossible, Sektar said to no one in particular. Your species is too young to possess this level of military capability. Colonel Ross smiled without humor. Age is not the same thing as experience, Your Excellency. Humans have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We just got better weapons recently. Dr. Amy Chen was already uploading captured data to the marine communication systems. The intelligence she had gathered would reshape human understanding of galactic politics and reveal the full scope of Kethvar infiltration into supposedly neutral worlds. But more importantly, it would provide evidence for war crimes tribunals. That would make sure this kind of atrocity never happened again. Captain Lisa Brooks coordinated the evacuation from orbit while directing the final phases of the space battle. The remaining Kethvar fleet was trapped between human task forces that had been positioned to cut off all escape routes. The aliens could surrender or die, but they could not run. The choice was made for them when Admiral Hayes broadcast terms that were not really negotiable. Complete disarmament of all Kethvar military forces, full reparations for human prisoners and their families, submission to galactic justice for war crimes committed against civilian populations, and permanent monitoring to ensure that biological warfare research was never conducted again. The response from the Kethvar Military Command was swift and desperate. They attempted to use their remaining orbital platforms to threaten the human population centers below as leverage for better terms. It was the last mistake their species would ever make as an independent power. Captain Tim Bradley received authorization for what the Terran Defense Force called Demonstration of Resolve. The massive, dreadnought, unconquerable powered-up weapons. Systems that had been theoretical concepts just 5 years earlier. The orbital platforms that threatened human civilians simply ceased to exist in bursts of energy that lit up the night sky of Zenthos Prime. The message was clear to every observer in the system. Humanity possessed the capability to sterilize entire worlds, but chose to use precise force against military targets only. It was a demonstration of both power and restraint that redefined how other species viewed human military doctrine. Overlord. Sektar watched his orbital defenses vanish and finally understood the trap his species had walked into. The humans had never been weak or unprepared. They had been patient and methodical in preparing for threats they hoped would never materialize. The diplomatic missions and trade negotiations had been genuine attempts at peaceful coexistence, backed by overwhelming force, held in reserve. "You could have destroyed us at any time," Sektar said, as Marine guards secured his hands behind his back. Jake Martinez nodded sadly. "That was never our goal, Your Excellency. We came here hoping to find common ground for mutual benefit. You chose to see that as weakness and decided to test our resolve. And now? Now you face justice for crimes against sentient beings, and your species learns to coexist peacefully with neighbors who have longer reach than you imagined." The extraction of human prisoners proceeded with military efficiency that impressed even veteran soldiers. Colonel Ross had planned for resistance and casualties, but found instead a broken enemy that no longer believed in its own invincibility. The HFY military simply stopped fighting when they realized that continued resistance would only increase the scope of their eventual punishment. Admiral Hayes established orbital control over the entire Xenthos system within 6 hours of arriving with the main fleet. Her ships moved with coordination that suggested years of planning and preparation for exactly this type of operation. The HFY had been outmaneuvered strategically before the first shot was fired. The rescued human prisoners provided testimony that shocked even hardened intelligence officers. The scope of HFY biological warfare research went far beyond what anyone had imagined. They had been developing weapons designed to target not just humans, but dozens of other species that the aliens considered inferior or inconvenient. President Johnson addressed the galaxy from the Oval Office with evidence that transformed human relationships with every major power. The HFY had been planning genocidal campaigns against multiple species while maintaining diplomatic relations with their intended victims. Humanity had uncovered and stopped what could have been the largest mass extinction event in galactic history. The response from alien governments was immediate and decisive. Species that had been neutral or suspicious of human intentions suddenly began requesting formal alliance agreements and mutual defense treaties. The revelation that humans had sacrificed their own diplomatic personnel to gather evidence of HFY war crimes demonstrated a level of moral commitment that impressed even humanity's critics. General Morrison coordinated the occupation of key HFY installations across their former territory. Human forces moved with restraint and professionalism that contrasted sharply with typical conquest behavior. Military targets were secured and disarmed, but civilian populations were protected and provided with humanitarian assistance. The trials began within weeks as human legal experts worked with representatives from dozens of species to establish procedures for prosecuting war crimes on a galactic scale. The evidence was overwhelming, and the verdicts were swift. Overlord Sektar and his military leadership faced life imprisonment on a prison world where they could contemplate the consequences of their decisions. But the real impact of the war was psychological rather than military. Every species in the main galaxy now understood that humanity possessed both the capability and willingness to use overwhelming force when faced with existential threats. More importantly, they understood that humans preferred cooperation and would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid unnecessary violence. Captain Brooks returned to patrol duties along the frontier, but now her single frigate was treated with respect that bordered on fear by potential troublemakers. Pirates and raiders who had previously ignored human warnings suddenly became very cooperative when approached by Terran Defense Force vessels. The Kethvar survivors were relocated to reservation worlds where they could rebuild their society. Under human supervision, some adapted to their new circumstances and began contributing to galactic civilization in productive ways. Others spent their time plotting revenge that would never come because the galaxy was watching them too closely now. Dr. Chen published her research on Kethvar biological warfare programs in academic journals that became required reading for medical professionals throughout known space. The techniques that had been developed for genocide were adapted for legitimate medical research that benefited every species in the galaxy. Ambassador Jake Martinez returned to diplomatic service but found that his job had become much easier. Alien representatives no longer tested human resolve or made veiled threats during negotiations. They had seen what happened when someone pushed humanity too far, and none of them wanted to repeat the Kethvar mistake. The war had lasted less than a month from start to finish, but its consequences would shape galactic politics for generations. Humanity had revealed capabilities that redefined the balance of power while demonstrating restraint that earned moral authority among civilized species. The bear had returned to sleep, but the galaxy remembered its claws. Peace became more common because everyone understood the price of breaking it. And in the quiet spaces between the stars, human ships continued their patrols, making sure that no one would ever again mistake kindness for weakness or patience for helplessness. The lesson was simple and permanent. Some sleeping giants were better left undisturbed. Admiral Susan Hayes stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Unconquerable and watched her fleet tear apart everything the Kethvar had built over 3 centuries of conquest. The alien homeworld burned beneath them while human ships systematically destroyed every military installation on the planet with surgical precision that left civilian areas untouched. Captain Tim Bradley commanded the Unconquerable with quiet efficiency that impressed even Hayes, who had seen the best officers humanity could produce. The ship itself was a monument to human engineering capability and strategic planning. For 5 years it had been hidden in deep space, while officially existing only in classified files that most admirals were not cleared to read. The Kethvar had made their biggest mistake when they decided to treat human prisoners as experimental subjects. Hayes had read Dr. Chen's intelligence report about the biological warfare research and felt something cold settle in her chest that would never warm up again. There were lines that civilized species did not cross, and the reptilian aliens had crossed all of them. "Fleet status report," Hayes commanded. 73 human vessels now in system, Admiral, Bradley replied. "All Kethvar orbital defenses neutralized. Enemy fleet attempting to regroup beyond the 4th planet, but they are taking heavy casualties," Hayes nodded grimly. The aliens still outnumbered human forces, but numbers meant nothing when your enemy fought according to principles you did not understand. Kethvar military doctrine emphasized individual ship combat and rigid command hierarchies. Human doctrine emphasized pack tactics and distributed decision-making that confused alien commanders who expected predictable behavior. On the surface of Xenthos, Prime Colonel Kate Ross led the first wave of human ground forces in an assault that redefined what the galaxy thought it knew about Terran military capabilities. The orbital drop pods came down like meteors carrying Marines who moved and fought with coordination that seemed impossible for separate units. The Kethvar had prepared for human ground combat based on their intelligence files. They expected slow-moving formations, using conventional tactics that could be countered with superior numbers and firepower. Instead, they faced soldiers who fought like they were reading each other's minds while using weapons that appeared to violate several laws of physics. Jake Martinez heard the sounds of battle getting closer to the palace and knew that rescue was coming. The HFY guards were receiving constant updates about human forces advancing through the city with minimal casualties while leaving HFY defenses in ruins behind them. Overlord Sektar paced around his throne room like a caged animal trying to understand how his perfectly planned operation had turned into a disaster. The intelligence reports made no sense. Human ships were appearing in systems throughout HFY space. Military bases that had been secure for decades were under attack by forces that seemed to know exactly where every weakness lay. How many human vessels do they actually possess? Sektar demanded from his intelligence coordinator. Unknown, my lord, the alien replied nervously. Our estimates were clearly wrong. They appear to have been building ships in secret while maintaining the appearance of a defensive navy, and their ground forces, also far more capable than projected. They fight with coordination that suggests enhanced communication systems and training that exceeds our elite units. Dr. Amy Chen listened to the reports with professional satisfaction. She had spent years studying alien psychology, and the HFY were reacting exactly as her models predicted. Aggressive species that relied on intimidation typically collapsed when faced with superior force applied by opponents who refused to be intimidated. Ryan Palmer was already planning the escape route when human forces reached the palace. His security training included scenarios for exactly this type of hostage situation, and he knew that the best chance for survival was to be ready when the shooting started. The breakthrough came when Colonel Ross's Marines reached the research facilities where human prisoners were being held. What they found there ensured that this war would not end with negotiation or compromise. The biological warfare laboratories contained evidence of systematic torture and medical experimentation that violated every principle of civilized conduct. More importantly, they found living witnesses, human civilians who could testify about HFY war crimes and provide intelligence about the scope of alien infiltration into human space. The rescued prisoners included cargo ship crews who had been captured months earlier, along with scientists and colonists taken from frontier settlements. Captain Brooks coordinated the rescue operations while maintaining orbital bombardment of military targets. Her tactical officers had identified every HFY command center and communication hub on the planet. The aliens were being systematically blinded and deafened while human forces advanced with perfect knowledge of enemy positions. The space battle above Xenthos Prime became a demonstration of why human military doctrine had evolved the way it did. HFY ships fought as individuals trying to maximize their own firepower and protection. Human ships fought as coordinated units where each vessel's capabilities enhanced the effectiveness of the entire group. Commander Torres used the Iron Resolve to anchor a formation that included 6 destroyers and 3 frigates. Together, they engaged a HFY battle group that should have outgunned them by a significant margin. Instead, the human ships used overlapping fields of fire and synchronized maneuvering that turned the engagement into a textbook example of combined arms warfare. The alien battle group was destroyed in 22 minutes. The human formation suffered damage to 1 destroyer that would be repaired by tomorrow morning. Reports began reaching Earth about the true scope of HFY military preparations. Intelligence officers analyzing captured data discovered that the aliens had been planning for human extermination for more than 2 years. They had infiltrated human shipping companies and colonial governments. They had built biological weapons specifically designed to target human physiology. They had marked every human settlement for destruction. President Johnson authorized the release of this intelligence to other galactic powers along with footage from the liberated research facilities. The reaction from alien governments was immediate and decisive. Species that had been neutral in human affairs suddenly began offering military assistance against the HFY threat. General Morrison coordinated the expansion of military operations beyond Zenthos Prime. Human forces that had been positioned throughout the galaxy under various cover identities began revealing themselves and striking at HFY installations. The aliens discovered that their intelligence network had been completely penetrated while human agents operated freely in their most secure facilities. The psychological impact on HFY forces was devastating. They had spent decades believing that humans were a young species with limited military capability. Now they faced evidence that humanity had been planning for interstellar warfare since before first contact with alien civilizations. Overlord Sektar received reports that his outer colonies were under attack by human task forces that appeared to know the location of every hidden military base. His intelligence networks were reporting impossible losses. His fleet commanders were describing human tactical capabilities that exceeded their worst-case scenarios. Most disturbing of all were the reports about human strategic coordination. The attacks were happening simultaneously across dozens of star systems with timing that suggested a level of planning and preparation that spanned years or possibly decades. Jake Martinez felt the palace shake again as human artillery began hitting targets in the capital city. The HFY guards were getting more nervous with each explosion, and some were beginning to look at the human prisoners with something that might have been fear. "Your Excellency," Jake said conversationally, "I think it would be appropriate to discuss surrender terms." Sektar turned to stare at the human ambassador with eyes that burned with hatred and something else that looked like dawning comprehension. "You planned this from the beginning." "We hoped it would not be necessary," Jake replied honestly. "But yes, we were prepared for the possibility that your species would choose violence over diplomacy. How long have you been preparing?" Jake smiled coldly. "How long do you think it takes to build the kind of fleet that is currently destroying your military capabilities?" The answer hit Sektar like a physical blow. Years. It would take years to build and position the forces that were now tearing apart his empire. Which meant that humans had been planning for this war since the early days of first contact between the species. Dr. Chen picked up the psychological breakdown that was happening inside the alien leader's mind. The HFY had convinced themselves that they were superior predators stalking helpless prey. Now they were learning that the prey had been watching them all along and preparing countermeasures for every possible threat. The sound of human boots echoed in the corridor outside the throne room as Colonel Ross's Marines fought their way through the last line of palace defenders. The rescue was almost complete, and the war was almost over. But first, there would be a reckoning for the crimes that had been committed against human prisoners. The galaxy was about to learn what Captain Lisa Brooks received Jake Martinez's emergency signal at exactly 1400 hours ship time. The coded message was short and simple, but it changed everything in the space of 3 seconds. The diplomatic mission was blown. The HFY were hostile. Human prisoners were being tortured for scientific research. Immediate military response authorized. Lisa had been expecting this message for weeks, even though she hoped it would never come. The intelligence community had suspected that the HFY invitation was a trap, but they needed confirmation before taking action. Now they had it, and the galaxy was about to learn something important about human nature. "Communications officer," Lisa commanded. "Send flash priority message to Earth. Authorization code Sleeping Giant. Tell them the bear is awake." The bridge crew of the Defiant Spirit moved with practiced efficiency. They had been preparing for this moment since leaving Earth Orbit 6 months ago. Every system was checked and double-checked. Every weapon was loaded and ready. Every crew member knew exactly what their job was when the shooting started. The reply from Earth came back in less than an hour, which meant Admiral Susan Hayes had been waiting by the communications console. The message contained new orders and something that made Lisa smile grimly. Reinforcements were already on the way, and they were bringing enough firepower to glass a planet. 3 hours later, the first ships began dropping out of hyperspace near Zenthos Prime. The heavy cruiser Iron Resolve appeared first, with Commander Nick Torres sending immediate greetings to his old friend Lisa Brooks. Behind it came destroyers and frigates and support vessels that had been hiding in deep space for months. The Kethvar orbital defenses went to high alert when they detected the human fleet, but they were not particularly worried. The aliens counted 15 human warships against more than 60 Kethvar vessels defending their homeworld. The numbers looked good from their perspective right up until they started scanning the human ships more carefully. Each human vessel was broadcasting identification, codes that made no sense according to Kethvar intelligence files. The Iron Resolve was supposed to be a training ship operating near Jupiter. The destroyer Relentless was listed as being in dry dock for maintenance. The frigate Storm Chaser had been reported destroyed in a pirate attack 6 months ago. Overlord Sektar received the news in his throne room, where he was still interrogating the human prisoners. The Orbital Defense Commander reported that human ships were appearing throughout the system, and none of them matched the intelligence profile of Terran naval capabilities. "Impossible," Sektar growled. "Human military doctrine emphasizes defensive operations. They do not have the ships or training for power projection at this range." The defense commander updated his report. 20 human warships now, then 30, then 50. All of them broadcasting impossible identification codes and carrying weapons that did not exist in any Kethvar database. Jake Martinez listened to the reports with growing satisfaction. The Kethvar were learning their first lesson about human military planning. What looked like weakness was actually preparation. What seemed like peaceful intentions was actually strategic positioning. And what appeared to be a small escort force was actually the tip of a very large spear. "You see, Overlord," Jake said conversationally, "humans have this saying about sleeping giants. It means that some things look harmless right up until you make them angry." Captain Brooks opened communications with the Kethvar orbital stations exactly 1 hour after the last human ship arrived. Her message was broadcast on all frequencies so that every alien in the system could hear it clearly. "This is Captain Lisa Brooks of the Terran Defense Force addressing all Kethvar military commanders. You are holding human diplomatic personnel against their will. You are torturing human civilians in violation of galactic law. You have 1 hour to release all prisoners and surrender your weapons. This is your only warning." The response from the Kethvar fleet was predictable. Overlord Sektar himself took control of the communications array to deliver what he thought was a crushing reply. "Human Captain, you are outnumbered 3-1 in our own system. Your ships are small and weak compared to Kethvar battle cruisers. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed like the insects you are." Lisa Brooks listened to the aliens' threats without expression. She had served in the Terran Defense Force for 15 years and participated in more combat operations than most people knew existed. She understood something that the Kethvar did not. Numbers meant nothing if you were fighting the wrong kind of war. Admiral Hayes, Lisa said into her private communication channel. Request permission to demonstrate proper military doctrine. The reply came back immediately. Permission granted, Captain. Show them what humans do to monsters. The first shots of the war were fired by the HFY patrol fleet that moved to intercept what they thought was a small human scouting force near the outer planets. 6 alien cruisers against 2 human destroyers. Should have been a quick victory for the reptilian forces. Instead, it became a masterclass in why humans had survived every challenge their species had ever faced. The destroyer, Relentless, and her sister ship Defiance did not try to match firepower with the larger alien vessels. They used speed and coordination and tactical knowledge that the HFY had never encountered before. Human ships fought like a pack of wolves bringing down much larger prey. They struck from multiple angles using weapons the aliens had never seen before. They coordinated their attacks with precision that seemed impossible for independent vessels. And they showed a level of technical superiority that made HFY military doctrine look like cave paintings. The 6 alien cruisers were reduced to scrap metal in 18 minutes. The 2 human destroyers suffered minor damage to their paint jobs. News of the engagement spread through the HFY fleet like wildfire. Suddenly, the numerical advantage did not seem as important as it had an hour earlier. The human ships were not just more advanced than expected. They were operating according to military principles that the aliens did not understand. Captain Torres moved the Iron Resolve into position above Zenthos Prime and began what he called diplomatic target illumination. Every HFY military installation on the planet found itself painted by human targeting lasers that seemed to come from nowhere: communication centers, command bunkers, weapon storage facilities. All of them marked for destruction by systems the aliens could not detect or counter. Overlord Sektar received reports that made less sense with each update. Human ships were appearing and disappearing throughout his territory like ghosts. Military bases that had been secure for centuries were suddenly under attack by forces that struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Most disturbing of all were the intelligence reports about human military capabilities. The ships attacking HFY positions were using technology that surpassed anything in their files. The tactical coordination suggested command and control systems that operated faster than thought, and the strategic planning indicated that humans had been preparing for this war long before the first diplomatic contact. Dr. Amy Chen managed to hack into the palace communication system using tools hidden in her diplomatic equipment. The message she sent to Earth was brief but devastating. The HFY had been conducting biological warfare research using human test subjects. They planned to deploy plague weapons against human colonies, and they had detailed intelligence about Terran defensive positions that could only have come from a long-term espionage operation. President Carl Johnson read the report in the White House Situation Room surrounded by military advisors who had been waiting for this moment. The intelligence community had suspected HFY infiltration for months, but they needed proof before taking action. Now they had it along with justification for a response that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. General Pete Morrison activated Operation Sleeping Giant from his command center deep beneath the Pentagon. Across human space military, units that officially did not exist began moving toward their assigned targets. Ships that were supposedly in mothballs powered up their engines. Weapons that were theoretically still in development loaded live ammunition. The HFY had made the classic mistake of aggressive species throughout history. They assumed that because humans preferred peaceful solutions, they were incapable of effective violence. They were about to learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. Jake Martinez felt the palace shake as human orbital bombardment began hitting military targets across Zenthos Prime. The Kethvar. Guards looked nervous for the first time since the humans had arrived. Even Overlord Sektar seemed to realize that his species had awakened something they did not understand and could not control. "You wanted to study human nature," Jake told the alien leader as explosions lit up the sky outside. "Congratulations. You are about to get a very thorough education." Jake Martinez woke up to silence, and that was the first sign of real trouble. The Kethvar Palace was never quiet because their people made constant clicking and hissing sounds when they moved around. Now there was nothing except the hum of air, recyclers, and the distant rumble of the city far below. He checked his communicator and found exactly what he expected. No signal to the Aurora's edge, no connection to Earth, no way to contact Captain Brooks or anyone else in human space. The Kethvar had cut them off completely, which meant the diplomatic mission was officially over, and something much worse was about to begin. Ryan Palmer was already awake and checking the door when Jake knocked on the wall between their rooms. The security chief had found 3 different listening devices in his quarters and 1 camera hidden in the ceiling light. Dr. Amy Chen had discovered similar surveillance in her room, plus something that looked like a device for monitoring human. "Vital signs. They are studying us like lab rats," Amy whispered when the 3 humans gathered in Jake's room. The questions yesterday were not about trade or politics. They wanted to know how humans react to stress and isolation and fear. Jake nodded grimly. He had suspected as much when Overlord Sektar started asking strange questions about human pain, tolerance, and how long people could survive without food or water. The Kethvar were not interested in peaceful cooperation. They were gathering data for something much darker. The door opened without warning, and Coordinator Velnash entered with 4 armed guards. The aliens wore different uniforms now, with armor plates and weapons that hummed with energy. Their eyes were brighter than before, and their scales had shifted to darker colors that meant aggression in Kethvar body language. "Ambassador Martinez," Velnash said with false politeness. "Overlord Sektar requests your presence for the morning session. Please follow me." Jake knew they had no choice, but he made sure the hidden transmitter in his jacket was still working. If Captain Brooks was monitoring the right frequencies, she would know that things were getting worse by the hour. The throne room looked different in daylight. The walls were covered with screens showing star maps and ship movements across a dozen sectors. Jake recognized some of the locations as human colonies and trade routes. Others showed alien species he had never seen before. All of them were marked with symbols that looked like targeting coordinates. Overlord Sektar was not alone this time. A dozen other Kethvar stood around his throne, wearing the dark robes of their military caste. Their eyes followed the humans like predators watching prey. The message was clear. The diplomatic phase was over, and now came the real purpose of this meeting. "Tell me, Ambassador," Sektar began without any greeting. "How many human colonies exist beyond your core worlds?" Jake kept his expression neutral. "That information is publicly available, Your Excellency. Perhaps 300 settled worlds with another 100 being developed. And how many humans live on these frontier settlements? The census data shows approximately 50 million citizens in the outer colonies. Sektar made a note on a datapad. Such precise numbers. Your species loves to count and measure everything. Very useful for planning purposes." One of the military officers stepped forward. What about defensive capabilities? How many warships patrol the border regions? Now Jake understood what was happening. This was not diplomacy anymore. This was an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a cultural exchange. The Kethvar were planning something that required detailed knowledge of human settlements and defenses. I am afraid military information is not appropriate for trade discussions, Jake replied carefully. Perhaps we could return to the economic agreements we came here to negotiate. The Kethvar laughed in unison, which sounded like a pack of hyenas finding fresh meat. Sektar stood up from his throne and walked down to where the humans stood. He was even bigger up close with scars that covered most of his face and arms. His claws were longer than Jake's fingers and looked like they could tear through metal. There will be no trade agreements, Ambassador. There will be no peaceful cooperation between our species. Humans have spread too far and claimed too much. The galaxy belongs to older and stronger races who understand the proper order of things, Dr. Chen stepped forward before Jake could stop her. You are making a mistake, Overlord. Humans are not aggressive by nature, but we do not accept threats against our people. Sektar moved faster than Jake thought possible. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, and the next his claws were pressed against Amy's throat. She did not flinch or cry out, but Jake could see the terror in her eyes. Threats? Sektar hissed. I am not making threats, little human. I am explaining reality. Your people think they are clever and strong, but you know nothing about real warfare. You have never faced an enemy that wants to erase you completely. Ryan Palmer took a step forward, but stopped when the guards raised their weapons. The security chief was tough and well-trained, but even he could not fight a dozen armed aliens in their own stronghold. Jake knew they needed a different strategy. Release her, Jake said quietly, and tell me what you really want. Sektar stepped back, but kept his claws extended. What I want is simple. I want your species to understand its place in the natural order. Some races are meant to rule and others are meant to serve or disappear. The screens around the throne room changed to show new images. Human cargo ships floating dead in space with their hulls torn open, rescue pods scattered across empty star systems, bodies frozen in the vacuum between worlds. Jake felt his hands clench into fists as he realized what he was seeing. The missing freighter convoys, he whispered. Not missing, Velnash corrected. Collected. We have been gathering specimens for study. Human physiology is quite interesting when examined under controlled conditions. The images kept changing. Research facilities where humans were kept in cages like animals. Medical equipment designed to test pain tolerance and psychological limits. Scientists taking notes while human prisoners screamed for help that would never come. Amy Chen made a small sound that might have been a sob. Ryan Palmer looked like he wanted to tear the aliens apart with his bare hands. Jake felt something cold and hard settle in his chest like a piece of ice that would never melt. You are talking about torture and murder, Jake said in a voice that did not sound like his own. We are talking about science, Sektar replied. Your species claims to be intelligent, but you react to pain and fear exactly like lower animals. Very disappointing, really. The final images showed Kethvar fleets massing at staging areas throughout their territory. Hundreds of warships loaded with weapons Jake had never seen before. Troop transports filled with soldiers wearing biological protection suits. Research vessels equipped with laboratories designed for live subjects. This is what happens next, Ambassador. We eliminate the human infestation from the galaxy. Your colonies will be sterilized. Your people will be studied until we understand exactly how to kill you efficiently, and your homeworld will become a museum dedicated to the folly of inferior species who forget their place. Jake looked at the images of human suffering and felt something snap inside his mind. The diplomatic part of his brain shut down completely, and something much older and more dangerous took control. He had been a soldier before he became an ambassador, and soldiers understood only one language when faced with monsters. "You have made a very serious mistake," Jake said softly. "Humans may prefer peaceful solutions, but we did not survive for millions of years by being helpless prey animals." Sektar laughed again. "Such brave words from a creature trapped in a cage. Tell me, Ambassador, what exactly do you think 3 humans can do against the entire Kethvar hegemony?" Jake smiled for the first time since arriving on Zenthos Prime. It was not a diplomatic smile anymore. It was the expression of a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be harmless. "You are about to find out," he said. The stars looked cold and distant through the viewport of the Terran diplomatic vessel Aurora's Edge as it approached Zenthos Prime. Ambassador Jake Martinez stood with his hands behind his back, watching the alien world grow larger on the screen. The planet was mostly brown and red, with strange geometric patterns that marked the cities of the Kethvar people. Jake had read every file about these reptilian aliens, but seeing their world made everything feel more real and more dangerous. "Captain, Lisa Brooks was 20 light-years away, commanding the escort frigate Defiant Spirit, and Jake wished she was closer. The Kethvar had insisted that human warships stay far from their homeworld during the diplomatic talks. They called it respect for their customs, but Jake knew it was really about making the humans feel alone and vulnerable. That was fine because Jake had other plans if things went wrong. The Aurora's Edge docked at the massive orbital station that hung above Zenthos Prime like a metal spider. Jake straightened his formal diplomatic uniform and checked that his small team was ready. Security Chief Ryan Palmer was a big man with calm eyes who never seemed worried about anything. Cultural Liaison Dr. Amy Chen was brilliant at reading alien behavior and had warned Jake that something felt wrong about this whole invitation. The 3 of them had worked together before, and Jake trusted them with his life. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Jake got his first look at the Kethvar in person. They were tall and thin with scales that shifted from green to brown depending on the light. Their eyes were large and yellow with vertical pupils like a snake. The lead alien wore elaborate robes covered in metal plates that clinked when he moved. He bowed slightly, but his eyes never left Jake's face. "Welcome, Ambassador Martinez," the alien said in perfect English that sounded wrong coming from his throat. "I am Diplomatic Coordinator Vel Nash, and I will guide you to the surface where Overlord Sektar waits to meet with you." Jake smiled and bowed back the way his briefings had taught him. "Thank you, Coordinator Vel Nash. We are honored to be here and look forward to productive discussions between our peoples." The shuttle ride to the surface was quiet except for the strange humming sounds the Kethvar made when they were thinking. Jake noticed that there were a lot more warships around Zenthos Prime than the intelligence reports had mentioned. Sleek alien fighters patrolled in perfect formations, while massive cruisers hung in orbit like sleeping predators. Either the Kethvar were more militaristic than expected, or they were expecting trouble. The capital city was a maze of tall spires connected by bridges that curved through the air like frozen lightning. Everything was built from the same reddish stone that made the whole place look like it was made of dried blood. Cathvar citizens stopped to stare at the humans as their convoy moved through the streets. Some looked curious, but most looked hostile. The palace of Overlord Sektar sat on top of the highest spire like a crown made of sharp edges. The throne room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. Overlord Sektar himself was bigger than the other Kethvar, with darker scales and scars across his face that told stories of old battles. He sat on a throne made from black metal that looked like it could cut anyone who touched it wrong. "So these are the famous humans," Sektar said without getting up. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "You look smaller than I expected." Jake kept his smile friendly even though the insult was obvious. "Appearances can be deceiving, Your Excellency. We humans have learned that the most dangerous things often come in small packages." Sektar's pupils narrowed to thin slits. "Indeed. I have heard stories about human cleverness. Some say you are too clever for your own good." The welcoming ceremony was a show designed to make the humans feel uncomfortable. Kethvar warriors demonstrated their fighting skills by tearing apart metal targets with their bare claws. Musicians played harsh music that hurt human ears. The food was served still moving, which made Dr. Chen turn pale, even though she tried to hide it. But the real message came during the gift exchange. The Kethvar tradition required guests to receive gifts from their hosts, and Jake expected some kind of art or ceremonial weapon. Instead, Coordinator Velnash presented him with a datapad containing star charts and ship movement records. "These show the recent travels of your merchant vessels," Velnash explained with what might have been a smile. "We have been monitoring human shipping lanes to ensure the safety of all travelers in this region." Jake looked at the data and felt his blood turn cold. The charts showed detailed tracking of human cargo ships, including their routes, schedules, and defensive capabilities. Some of the ships listed had reported mysterious sensor contacts in recent weeks. Others had gone missing entirely. "This is very thorough," Jake said carefully. "Our shipping companies will be interested to know their movements are being watched so closely." "Oh, but this is only a small sample," Sektar said from his throne. "We have much more detailed information about human activities. Your colonies, your military positions, your trade agreements with other species. Knowledge is the most valuable gift we can offer." Dr. Chen touched Jake's arm lightly, which was their signal that she was picking up danger signs from the aliens. Ryan Palmer had noticed it too because his hand moved closer to the weapon he carried under his diplomatic coat. The Kethvar were not trying to hide their surveillance anymore. They wanted the humans to know they had been watched and studied and cataloged like specimens. The second gift was worse. A hologram projector showed images of human families on frontier worlds going about their daily lives, children playing in parks, workers building new settlements, scientists conducting research, all of it recorded by hidden Kethvar observers, who had been close enough to count the freckles on a child's face. "Your species is fascinating to study," Sektar continued. "So social and cooperative. You work together like insects building a hive, but insects can be stepped on very easily." Jake realized they were not here for trade negotiations. They were here because the Kethvar wanted to deliver a message, and that message was simple. "We have been watching you. We know where you live. We can reach you whenever we want." "Your Excellency," Jake said with ice in his voice. "I hope you understand that humans do not respond well to threats." "Threats?" Sektar laughed, which sounded like breaking glass. "These are not threats, Ambassador. These are facts. Your people spread across the galaxy like a disease claiming worlds and resources that belong to older and stronger species. Perhaps it is time someone reminded you of your place. The evening ended with the humans being escorted to quarters that looked comfortable, but felt like prison cells. The doors locked from the outside, and Kethvar guards stood in the corridors. Jake sat on the edge of the bed and activated a small device hidden in his jacket. If Captain Brooks was listening, she would know that the diplomatic mission had just become something much more dangerous. 20 light years away, Lisa Brooks received the coded signal and began moving her ship toward Zenthos Prime. The bear had been poked, and now it was time to see what happened when humans decided to show their teeth.